6 months ago, I buried the love of my life. I cried. I held a memorial. I kept his jacket like a relic. I told myself that even through the pain, he was finally at peace. But on a regular morning at the neighborhood market, I saw him, alive. At the checkout, like nothing had happened. I nearly fainted. And instead of screaming, I followed him. What I found out that afternoon changed everything I believed about love, loyalty, and truth. My name is Dolores. I'm 66 years old, and for over 4 decades, Franklin was my everything. We shared meals, bills, birthdays, illnesses, and even long silences. We were never rich, but we laughed together over fried eggs and rice on Sundays. We had a simple house filled with plants, photos, and fresh coffee in the morning. He was the kind of man who made coffee quietly just so I'd wake up to the smell. I used to call him stubborn, and he'd say I was the love of his life. He was my husband, my friend, my rock, even with all the little arguments that come with a long life together. I met Franklin when I was just 19 at a church party. He was awkward but offered me a soda with shaking hands. 2 weeks later, he showed up at my mom's door with flowers stolen from the city garden. That was the kind of man. He was a little rough around the edges, but sweet. We got married young, and life was tough from the start. We rented for almost 20 years before we could buy our own little house. He sold auto parts. I gave tutoring lessons to keep the lights on. We didn't have luxuries, but we never lacked love. Franklin was private. He didn't like phones, social media, or talking too much with the neighbors, but he loved me. I could feel it. When my back hurt, he'd heat up rosemary water and press it gently on my shoulder. When I was down, he'd play old pop songs just to make me sing. I thought I knew him like the back of my hand. What man spends 40 years next to you hiding who he really is? That thought never crossed my mind until everything changed. The last time I saw Franklin before the tragedy was a Monday morning. He said he had a short trip to close a sale, kissed my forehead, and asked me to freeze the chicken. Just an ordinary goodbye. I closed the gate waving at him. I had no idea that wave would be our last. I had no idea I would bury that face, not knowing the truth behind that farewell. Because life doesn't always give you clues. Sometimes it just flips upside down. I've never been one to wallow. I always believed that when life breaks you, you pick up the pieces and go on. But with Franklin, it felt like half my body had been ripped out and thrown into a hole. I started sleeping on the couch with the TV on, pretending he was still around. I left his slippers by the bed. His clothes stayed in the closet for weeks untouched. When people asked how I was, I smiled. Because the pain of losing the love of your life isn't something you share. You hold it, swallow it, carry it in silence. And I did. 6 months dragging that weight inside. The neighbor brought me cornbread and said time would heal. But it didn't. The church prayed for me, but faith felt so far away. I talked to his photo every night before bed. I told him what I bought at the store, complained about the leaking faucet. It was like somehow he was still here. And I clung to that because it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. That morning seemed like any other. The sun came through the kitchen window, and I was craving fresh papaya. I grabbed my purse and walked to the small market on the corner. I was thinking about the sales, the bakery smell, the old men playing dominoes nearby. But when I got to the fruit section, something made me freeze. I saw a man from behind. The posture, the way he handled the bread bags. It was exactly like Franklin. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks. I'd seen his face everywhere for months. The gas station guy, the delivery man, even a cab driver had reminded me of him. But this man, he moved the same way. Adjusted his collar like Franklin always did. And when he turned his face, my heart couldn't handle it. It was him. Thinner, with different hair, a short beard he never had. But it was him. My Franklin. My husband. Alive. The fruit slipped from my hands, but I didn't feel it. I grabbed the pasta shelf to keep from falling. The ground disappeared under me. My hands shook, my body reacted like I'd seen a ghost. But he wasn't a ghost. He was breathing, walking, carrying a bag of carrots and bread. Smiling. Like everything was fine. Like he had never died. Like he hadn't let me bury him. I didn't scream. Didn't call out. Didn't rush toward him. I just left. My feet carried me outside as if they knew I couldn't handle it. I crossed the street, barely looking. Sat on the bench facing the market and waited. My mouth dry, eyes wide, chest burning. The air felt heavier than stone. But I didn't cry. I waited. I had to understand. I had to see to believe. Minutes later, he came out, holding another bag, now checking his phone. Still had that impatient walk like he was always late. I stood up slowly, fixed my purse on my shoulder, and started following him. Every step hit like a punch. Every corner he turned added more questions. Was it really him, or was I losing my mind? But then he coughed, and even the cough was his. It was Franklin. No more doubt. I was following the man I had buried. He walked 4 or 5 blocks, took streets I'd never been down, ended up in a quiet neighborhood with dirt roads and small houses. And there in front of a rusty gate he stopped, rang the bell like someone who belonged. I stood across the street behind a tree. My heart pounded in my throat. The door opened. A woman came out holding a child. The child screamed "Daddy" and ran to him. And my world shattered. In that moment, I lost all strength in my legs. I leaned against the tree trunk, forehead pressed to the bark, trying not to faint. The scene played over and over in my mind like a nightmare. Him picking up the child, smiling at the woman walking into that house like it was his home. The child's laugh cut through me. Light, free, happy. A happiness I never saw on his face with me. That hurt more than any funeral. It was betrayal made flesh. I stayed there for almost an hour frozen, staring at that peeling green door. My mind refused to accept it. How was this possible? He had faked his own death, buried his past like I was an old shirt. When had he planned this, before or after? Saying he loved me with rice still in his mouth at Sunday lunch, I looked for answers but only found more questions. The pain didn't come with tears. It came in cold waves, nausea, and a silent rage. I dragged myself back home. The streets looked different. Narrower sidewalks, colder wind, grayer sky. I went and locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed on the living room floor. I lay there staring at the ceiling. Nothing made sense. The TV was on mute, playing a soap opera that felt like it was mocking me. And there I was lying like a widow who was never really a widow. My chest rose and felt like I was carrying stones. I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out. But I didn't. I got up like a woman who carried more than grief. I carried lies. I went to the closet and pulled out our old wedding album. The leather cover worn, the clasp broken. I sat at the table flipping through page after page. Me with flowers in my hair. Him in that tight suit sweating nervously. Crooked smiles. Hands held. Hands held. A ring he had picked himself. Was it ever real? Every photo felt like a joke. I searched for clues. A weird look, maybe. But everything looked sincere. I stayed up all night. When the sun began to rise, the last photo fell to the floor. The two of us on the couch, his arms around me, our faces touching. I picked it up, pressed it to my cheek like I could still hear him breathe. But now that face had another name. Another house. Another life. How can someone kill their own story without blinking? I felt small. Robbed. Like someone had broken into my home and taken my soul. I went to the bathroom and washed my face. The water was cold, sharp. I looked in the mirror and told myself, you're not crazy. He's alive. I needed proof. I had to show the world. This couldn't stay hidden. I put on plain clothes, grabbed an old bag, and hid my phone in the coat pocket. I left the house with one thought pounding in my head. If he erased me from his life, then I'll scream to the world that I existed. I took the same 1-2A bus he had taken the day before. The ride was long, but I stayed alert. My eyes scanned every corner, every sign, every storefront. I got off 3 stops early and walked, heart racing. Hands sweaty, bag clutched to my side. I wasn't the same Dolores anymore. I was someone new, dressed in silence and fury, thirsty for truth. I passed the square, turned onto the dirt road, and stopped in the same place as the day before. The house looked the same. Gate shut, curtains drawn. But this time I had a plan. I pulled out my phone and turned on the camera. Hid it inside my coat. Walked slowly, pretending not to care. But when I got close, I peeked through the gate and snapped. Once, twice, 3 times. I caught him sitting on the porch wearing shorts and a t-shirt. The woman came out with juice. The child played on the ground with a toy truck. A happy family. My stomach turned. Every photo felt like a stab. But I kept going. Crossed the street again, hid behind the tree, and waited. When he came out to take out the trash, I snapped again. Got his profile. The beard, the tired eyes, the curve of his back. It was unmistakable. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was him. My husband. Alive. Like he never swore eternal love in front of God and everyone. Like I was just a forgotten chapter. I went home clutching the phone in my hand. Took a cab this time. I couldn't risk seeing anyone. At home I locked everything and sat on the kitchen floor. I reviewed the photos one by one. Zoomed in, marked the details. The house. His face. The woman's clothes. The street sign in the background. All of it was proof now. Proof I wasn't crazy. Proof my pain had a face, a name, and an address. And that man owed me answers. The next day I contacted a lawyer my niece had recommended. A no-nonsense man with a strong voice. I showed him everything. He was stunned but said this was serious. Identity fraud, abandonment, maybe even criminal charges. I was shaking. I signed the papers. Started the case. It felt like I was finally burying that love for real. But this time the right way. With truth, with justice, with courage. Because on paper I was still his wife, and he was a fraud. In less than a week, we got a court order to reopen the case. Police got involved. All assets under Franklin's name were temporarily frozen. Turns out he was using a new name but the same social security number. The investigation moved fast. Every new discovery lifted a weight from my chest. He had killed me in life, but now the truth was pouring through the cracks, and I was standing strong, alive, ready to walk through hell if I had to. At the first court hearing, Franklin didn't show up. His lawyer said he was out of state working. A weak excuse, but enough to delay the inevitable. I sat in those cold plastic chairs feeling everything but fear. With every page of the case I was rebuilding the woman he tried to erase. I ignored the curious stares, the whispers in the hallway. My focus was clear, to prove that Franklin didn't just lie to the courts. He tore my life apart with planning and cowardice. On the way home I passed the church where we got married. I went in. The smell of old wood and candles hit me. I sat in the last pew like I used to when I still believed love was enough. I looked at the altar, at the crucifix I had prayed to for him so many times, and I cried. Not from pain, but from rage, frustration, abandonment. It felt like every tear peeled off another layer of the mask he wore for years. I wasn't praying for divine justice. I wanted justice here. I wanted him to pay. The next week, the police called. They found out the so-called death had been confirmed by a close friend of Franklin's, a man named Roberto. I went down to the station with the photos and old documents. When I showed a photo of the two together, the investigator muttered, "This guy's shown up in other cases." My blood ran cold. I wasn't the only one. There was a pattern. Franklin and this accomplice had been running a scheme. Disappearing, faking deaths, stealing money, starting over. It was a con. A carefully crafted lie. I went through our old letters, bills, and bank statements. I found a life insurance policy he had taken out just a few months before he died. A large amount. The beneficiary? A name I had never seen before. I gave everything to the lawyer. He was shocked and said this might be the missing piece. Now we had a clear financial motive. The judge approved access to the bank records. 2 days later, we got confirmation the money had been withdrawn the week after the funeral. By someone using a fake ID. The account was under the name Jorge Lima, but the signature, it was his. Franklin had killed himself on paper to be reborn with another name. Another social security number. Another woman. Another house. But the worst part wasn't the fraud. It was knowing he had planned every step while I was washing his clothes, cooking his favorite meals, making plans for our anniversary. None of it was an accident. It was a planned escape, a crime with a script. And I was just the forgotten extra. I couldn't sleep anymore. I spent the nights with the lamp on, going over documents, cutting up photos, marking dates. Every detail could be evidence. The lawyer called me twice a day. The police opened a formal investigation. And through it all, I stayed strong. Not out of pride, but out of dignity. Because if I let this be forgotten, he would have buried me twice. And this time, I wasn't the grieving widow. I was the living witness to the biggest betrayal a woman can face. I went back to the house near the market with one thought in my mind: I needed to look him in the eyes. To see if he could still face me. I dressed simply. Dark pants, plain blouse, hair tied back. I had the camera in my pocket, but this time I wasn't there to record. I was there to feel. When I got to the street, the sun was high, almost blinding. I stood across from the house, near a streetlight, and waited. It didn't take long. The door opened. He came out, backpack slung over his shoulder, walking fast like he always did. I waited until he passed and followed. This wasn't stalking, it was confrontation. I wanted to understand how he had erased me like I never existed. We walked through 3 streets until he stepped into a bakery. I waited for him to sit down. Then I walked in. The door chime made him look up, and then he saw me. His face lost all color. He went pale like he'd seen a ghost. I walked over, sat across from him and said, "So, this is how the dead drink coffee?" He didn't respond. Swallowed hard. Lowered his eyes. I kept going. "Did I have to die so you could live this new life? You buried me with flowers, Franklin. But you forgot I still breathe." He tried to say something, but stuttered. I spoke quietly, firmly. "Don't bother lying. I saw everything. I know about the child, the house, the insurance." His hand was shaking. The juice glass nearly slipped. The shame was clear. But I wasn't there to humiliate. I was there to show him he hadn't won. He mumbled, "I just wanted a fresh start." That hit like a slap. A fresh start? Alone? Pretending you never had a past? No wife? No family? No God? He lowered his head. A small man. A coward. I took a deep breath and said, "You didn't have to die. You just needed the guts to look me in the eye and say you wanted to leave." He tried to touch my hand, but I pulled away. There was no touch that could fix this. I stood up, looked him in the eye one last time, and whispered, "You killed me without a weapon, and now you're going to pay." I walked out of the bakery with my heart racing, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was release. The truth had left my lips. I had faced the man who destroyed me, and I was still standing. Outside, the wind was strong. I lifted my face and let it mess up my hair, and for the first time in months I felt alive again. Because now I wasn't a victim anymore. I got home exhausted, kicked off my shoes and walked barefoot to the hallway mirror. I looked at myself for a long time. Older, yes. Tired eyes, yes. But something was new strength. I went to the kitchen, made some coffee, sat at the table, and wrote my story in the old notebook he used for bills. Every word was a wound closing. I was ready for what came next. And Franklin, he wasn't a secret anymore. He was a case. A process. And I was the walking truth. 2 days after that meeting at the bakery, I got a strange notification on my phone. An unknown number had tried to reach me over 10 times during the night. At first, I ignored it. But on the third call that morning, I answered. It was the woman from the house. The new wife. Her voice was tense, low, almost a whisper. "Can we talk?" she said. My stomach turned. I asked who she was. She hesitated, then said, "I'm Gabriel's mom, Franklin's son." That hit like a stone to the chest. We agreed to meet at a small cafe in her neighborhood. When I arrived, she was already there, nervous, holding a cup with both hands. She wore simple clothes, her hair tied back, tired eyes. We sat face to face like two women sharing the same grief, only mine was fake, and hers was built on lies. Before I could say anything, she said, "He told me he was a widower, that you died of cancer. I only found out the truth after seeing a photo of you on your Facebook." She seemed sincere, shaking as she spoke. She said she met Franklin at a used car event where he introduced himself as Jorge. Said he was kind, involved, took good care of her son Gabriel, was from a previous relationship. But over time, things stopped adding up. Dates didn't match. Sudden absences, mood swings. Then one day, a friend of hers saw one of my old posts mourning him with the same photo Franklin kept in his wallet. The whole thing fell apart. He didn't say anything after I confronted him, just said he wanted to erase the past. That you were weak, sick, always feeling sorry for yourself. Her words cut like a knife. I trembled, but I didn't cry. I held firm. I said to her, "Weak?" I buried a man who was still breathing. I climbed out of a hole he dug with my own hands. She swallowed hard, apologized, said she didn't know anything, that she felt betrayed too. 2 women, 2 lies, 1 con man. She handed me copies of messages, documents, a rental agreement under his fake name. All of it was gold for my lawyer. We said goodbye with a cold hug, heavy with guilt on both sides. I walked away from that cafe thinking nothing could surprise me anymore. But I was wrong, because as I turned the corner I saw Franklin across the street. He had followed us, holding the child. And in that moment my blood boiled. He knew the truth was catching up. I took 2 steps toward him, but he ran. Disappeared between cars, crossed the street without looking. The child cried in his arms, confused. The woman chased after him. I stood frozen. That wasn't just cowardice, it was fear. He knew justice was coming. I snapped a photo right from the street, him running away from me. That image became my new symbol. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one running from the pain. He was running from the truth, and that gave me strength to keep going. I got home with my head spinning. Called the lawyer. Sent him all the new documents in the photo. He said, "Now we have enough to push for a warrant." My heart pounded. The idea of seeing Franklin behind bars brought mixed emotions. It was justice, but also the end of a story I never imagined ending like this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the bed, picked up the notebook, and started writing a letter not to him, but to myself. In the letter, I poured out everything I'd carried for 6 months. The sleepless nights, the silent Sundays, the ignored birthdays. I wrote to the woman who believed too much, who loved too hard, who prayed for someone who had already left long before he died. I was honest. I told myself I forgave myself, that I wasn't stupid or weak. I was human, and I deserved peace. When I finished, I closed my eyes and slept with the letter under my pillow, for the first time without dreaming of him. The next morning, the doorbell rang. It was the police. The chief wanted me at the station to confirm some documents. I grabbed my coat, tied up my hair, and went. When I got there, a thick file was on the table. "We found everything," he said. Inside were forged travel records, the insurance paperwork, bank statements under his fake name, and most shocking, a marriage certificate with the new woman, registered in a small town courthouse. Yes, he had married me, then married her. 2 legal marriages, 2 identities, 2 lives. The chief looked stunned, said the case felt like something out of a crime show. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I took a deep breath and signed the papers. My hand shook, but my voice was steady. Now there's no way he can run. And there wasn't. The arrest warrant was approved right there in front of me. I stood up, thanked him, and walked out feeling like justice had finally begun. That night, I got the call. "He's been arrested." The lawyer's voice was flat, direct. Franklin was caught leaving a hotel, trying to leave town with fake documents. He didn't resist, didn't say a word, just lowered his head and got in the police car. I hung up without saying much, sat on the couch, looked at the ceiling, and breathed. The tears came not from pain but from closure. It felt like after everything, I had finally buried the right man. And this time he wasn't coming back. But the case was far from over. The media found out. Reporters showed up at my door. Neighbors whispered. Anonymous calls came in. I saw my name in headlines. Woman finds out husband declared dead, was living with another family. I didn't want fame. I wanted peace. But deep down, I knew other women might see themselves in me. That my pain could be a warning. And somehow that gave me a strange kind of comfort. Because even tragedy, if told right, can light dark paths. The media didn't leave me alone for days. Reporters knocking. Neighbors staring like I was a character in a drama. I got messages of support and judgment. Some said I should let it go. Turn the page. But no one knew what it was like to wake up every day next to a ghost. No one knew what it meant to wear mourning for a man who was still breathing. A man who looked you in the eye and said, "I love you," while secretly signing papers to bury you. Social media exploded. Old photos of us were pulled from my profile without permission. Some called me a warrior. Others naive. How didn't she see it sooner? They said. I read it all in silence. Not to suffer, but to understand the size of it all. I, Dolores, 66 years old, retired, a regular woman, was now a headline. But inside my home, I was still just a woman with a closet full of lies and a heart stitched back together by force. I started getting letters. Women of all ages shared similar stories. Abandonment, disappearances. Men who vanished, leaving behind kids, debts, promises. Some letters were stained with tears. Others had drawings from kids asking where their dads were. I read everything slowly. Every story was a cracked mirror. And in the middle of all that pain, I realized I wasn't just the victim of one man, but of a culture that lets men walk away without ever looking back. One day, I got a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo of me and Franklin when we were young, cut out carefully. And a handwritten note that said, "Sorry." It wasn't his handwriting. It looked like a child's. Maybe the woman. Maybe the boy himself. I placed the letter in the kitchen drawer with the medicine. It was small, but it felt heavy. It didn't undo anything, but somehow it moved me. It felt like someone on the other side finally saw my pain. The following week, the judge set the date for the first criminal hearing. I would see him again, this time in handcuffs, inside a courtroom. I got ready slowly, chose a neutral outfit, tied my hair back, took my knees for support. When we arrived, the room was full. Cameras, lawyers, people whispering. When Franklin walked in, I looked straight at him, and he looked away like a trapped rat. For the first time, he wasn't the confident man. He was just a liar exposed. There was no deal. The district attorney charged him with identity fraud, theft by deception, child abandonment, document forgery, and bigamy. The prosecutor read the charges coldly. Every word cut through the air. And I sat there still as stone. Not out of coldness, but out of survival. I had already suffered enough. Now was the time for justice. For what was right. for what was fair. Because if he killed our story, then I would make sure the whole world knew I survived the lie with my head held high. I came home from court in silence, no rush. Walked in, took off my shoes, and went straight to the bedroom. The photo frame on the dresser still held our picture. But now when I looked at it, I didn't feel pain. I felt relief. It was like looking at an old story, not a current wound. I opened the frame, carefully removed the photo, and placed it in the memory box. I didn't throw it away. Because even in the lies, there were moments of truth, and you don't erase everything. You just learn to live with it. That night I got an unexpected call. It was his new partner. Her voice was calm, steady. You did what I never could. You made him face the truth. I took a deep breath. She said she had moved away with her son, starting over. If it weren't for you, maybe he'd still be lying to me. She thanked me, cried, and hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand, staring into nothing. That gesture didn't erase anything, but it closed a cycle, an end, a beginning. A few days later, the local newspaper invited me to give an interview. They wanted to hear my side of the story. I thought about it for hours. I was scared to expose myself again. But I said yes. I spoke as a woman, as a citizen, as a victim, and a survivor. I talked about pain scars, but also about the strength I had found in myself. At the end, the reporter asked, "What would you say to other women going through something like this?" I answered, "Don't stay silent. Don't die inside. The truth may hurt, but lies kill slowly." The interview aired and went viral. I received over 1,000 messages in 2 days. People from all over the country saying they felt seen. Women who said they finally had the courage to speak up. Men who apologized to their wives. Young people who hugged their grandmothers tighter. I cried reading everything. For the first time, I felt my pain hadn't been for nothing. That the shame had become a voice. And that even wounded, I could be a light for those walking through darkness. I started getting invited to events, support groups, community talks. I wrote more in my notebook. My words began to carry weight and meaning. I discovered that shared pain becomes a bridge. I told my story in churches, schools, even a women's prison. There I hugged an inmate who said I was the woman who lied. I wish I had met someone like you before. I left in silence. Because not every forgiveness is spoken. Sometimes it's just a look, and then you move on. At home, I sat on the porch and looked at the sky. The night was clear. The stars felt closer. I picked up the old photo album, now tied with a red ribbon. I closed it, held it against my chest, and whispered, "It's over." I didn't feel hate. I felt peace. I had been lied to, betrayed, abandoned. But I was whole. Because those who survive death come back knowing that living is an act of courage. And I was alive. And ready to keep going. A week later, I was called back to the police station. They had completed the full analysis of the body buried as Franklin. What they told me still gives me chills. The forensic team confirmed there was no DNA match. The ID was fake, and the so-called friend who identified the body disappeared right after the funeral. The truth was undeniable. Franklin had faked his own death using someone else's body, likely a victim of an accident. Or worse, someone discarded by him. The investigator told me they were looking into a potential network of fraud and staged disappearances. Franklin was just one piece, but a dangerous one, because he knew how to exploit every gap in the system. The worst part? For months he was legally dead. That's why no one looked further. It was my desperation that reopened the case. I sat there listening to the details, wondering how someone sleeps at night knowing they staged their own death and left a wife in mourning. I went to the cemetery where he was buried. I brought flowers, but not for grief, for justice. I placed a note on the grave that read, "Here lies the lie I carried for 6 months." I stood there in silence for a few minutes, feeling the wind move through the cypress trees. That place didn't hurt me anymore, because now I knew that casket was never his. The real Franklin was alive in prison, finally facing what he'd done. And I was at peace with the emptiness he left behind. Back home, I turned on the old radio he used to love. A classic song played, one we used to dance to in the living room when we were still us. I felt a lump in my throat but didn't let the tears fall. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, and opened the drawer. I picked up my wedding ring. Instinctively, I slipped it on, looked at it, then took it off gently and placed it in a small box. That ring wasn't a burden anymore. It was just a symbol, a memory of who I was, not of who I am now. From that moment, I decided I had to move on, and not pretend, really move on. I started going back to church, signed up for a painting class, said yes when a friend invited me to join a book club. I began rebuilding Dolores, not the abandoned wife, but the woman who survived, who now chose her own steps. The pain still lived in me, but it no longer ran the house. Now I was in charge of myself again. I got a call from the district attorney's office. The final hearing had been scheduled and they wanted me to testify one last time. I said yes. I knew it would be the final moment, the turning point. Justice wouldn't give me back the years I lost, but it could show the world that truth always finds its way. That even when lies wear suits, sign papers, and kiss your forehead before walking away, they fall. Sooner or later they fall. On the day of the final hearing, I got dressed slowly. I wore a blue dress my sister had given me years ago. Simple, beautiful, strong. It was the outfit I chose to face the end. I entered the courtroom without looking away. This time Franklin was there, handcuffed, guarded, looking defeated. But still, he didn't apologize. He looked at me with that same unreadable face, like he was the victim of his own choices. I sat across from him. The judge asked for silence, and the trial began. The prosecutor gave a sharp, direct summary, listed every piece of evidence, every lie, every crime. Talked about the insurance, the double marriage, the fake identity, the abandonment. Then the judge asked me to speak. I stood up, took a deep breath, and walked to the center of the room. I looked at the judge but spoke to everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to remind you that death isn't just when a body stops. The cruelest death is when someone buries the love of a living person. The room fell silent. I continued. I mourned a man who was still breathing. I prayed for someone who was lying. And today, I'm not here for revenge. I want justice. I want him to see what he did and to know that, despite everything, I stood back up. The judge thanked me, asked me to return to my seat. As I walked back, I met Franklin's eyes. For the first time, I saw regret. Not the kind you see in movies, but the downcast look of someone who knows he's lost everything. Even the respect of the one who trusted him most. The sentence was read aloud. Guilty of fraud, theft by deception, child abandonment, identity fraud, bigamy, sentenced to prison with the possibility of a closed regime. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I didn't celebrate, didn't applaud. I simply stood, thanked the judge, and left the courtroom without looking back. Because what I needed wasn't to see him locked up. It was to know that the world finally recognized I had been betrayed but not defeated. Outside, the sun was bright. I took the bus, sat by the window, and let the wind hit my face. It was a simple feeling, but in that moment it felt like a reward. The weight I'd carried for 6 months was starting to dissolve. There was still pain, still memories. But now all of it existed alongside freedom. I was a free woman. Free from lies, free from guilt, free from the fear of being forgotten like a ghost. That evening I sat in the park across from my house. Children played. An old lady fed pigeons. Life went on. I closed my eyes for a few seconds and felt a deep peace I hadn't felt in a long time. My life wasn't a movie with a perfect ending, but it was real. And I was alive, sitting there whole, ready for whatever came next. Because after everything what could possibly bring me down now, I had survived the cruelest kind of death. The kind that tries to erase who you are. News of Franklin's conviction spread quickly. Some old friends called in shock. Others just sent supportive messages. Strangely, some disappeared as if my pain was too much for them to deal with. I didn't blame anyone. Everyone handles truth in their own way. I, for example, only started accepting everything once I stopped looking for answers. Because some questions don't have explanations, only consequences. And I was finally facing mine head on. One afternoon I opened the last drawer in the living room cabinet. There was a box with letters, receipts, old memories. At the bottom, I found a yellowed envelope I had never seen before. It was from Franklin. A letter handwritten 2 days before his death. My hands shook. I opened it slowly, afraid of what I'd read. The first word said, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't come back. I'm sorry, Dolores." My heart raced. It was a real goodbye. The letter was messy. He spoke of debts, threats, a mistake that had grown too big to fix. He said he had to run. That he was scared of putting me in danger. But he also confessed he had fallen for someone else. I was weak, a coward, and I ruined everything good in me. I cried like I hadn't in weeks. Not because I forgave him, but because I understood. Franklin wasn't a monster. He was a weak man. Lost. Afraid of the truth. It didn't excuse him, but it explained part of the damage. I put the letter back in the box. I didn't show anyone. That was mine. A quiet ending to something that had made too much noise. I sat on the couch, hugged a pillow, and closed my eyes. For the first time I felt like I could move on without carrying so much weight. The truth had been told. The case was over. And now even his voice on old paper sounded like a distant echo. It still hurt, of course, but it was clean pain, without poison. And without poison, the wound can heal. Days later, I started painting again. One of the canvases I began showed the outline of a slightly open door, a shadow stepping out. I painted it with blues, whites, and a hint of yellow around the edge. When I finished, I understood. That was me walking out of mourning a lie. I hung the painting in the living room. Below it, I placed a note that read, "Truth hurts, but teaches you how to walk with what's left." Every time I walk past it, I remember I still have ground to stand on. I still have a story to tell. His letter, the painting, the conviction, all of it was part of a new cycle. I wouldn't erase Franklin from my memory, but I wouldn't live in his shadow either. My life needed to have my name at the center, and little by little I began rewriting my routine. Visits to the bakery, phone calls to my sister, tea with the neighbors. I even laughed watching a silly movie at night. It wasn't pure happiness yet, but it was a start. Because after losing someone who was still alive, the greatest gift is finding yourself again. It was on one of those quiet afternoons that I got another unexpected visit. The doorbell rang. I opened it. And there she was, the woman who had lived with Franklin. She looked thinner, her face worn, holding a folder. "Can we talk?" she asked. I invited her in. We sat on the porch with birds singing in the background. She seemed nervous. After a few seconds of silence, she placed the folder on the table and said, "I thought you should see this. It's about him and about me." Inside were letters, photos, notes, journals she had found hidden in the closet after he was arrested, written by Franklin. And there in the middle of scribbles and confessions, he wrote about guilt, shame, mistakes, longing. One page read, "Dolores was my mirror. When I broke her, I shattered what little good was left in me. It broke me. I hadn't expected anything from him. But in that moment, I cried for everything that could have been, for everything he destroyed, and could never fix." She cried too, said she didn't know what to do with all of it, but felt it wasn't right to keep it hidden. "You were the real wife. He lived a lie. But your life together was real." Those words echoed. I didn't answer. I just held her hand, a long grip full of meaning. Her pain was real too. Franklin had destroyed more than one life. And now with those notebooks in my hands, I knew for sure he lived with guilt. But he lied until the end. After she left, I spent hours reading. Some lines were harsh, others full of regret. He wrote about moments I had already forgotten. Our first trip, our song, the time we danced in pajamas after a storm. And then I understood, maybe he did love me. But love isn't enough when you choose to lie. Love without courage becomes destruction. And that's what he did. Not because he didn't love, but because he was too afraid to be honest. I locked the journals in a box, not as a sweet memory, but as a reminder that even the biggest lies leave traces, and that even the strongest love crumbles without truth. After that, I slept deeply. For the first time, I dreamed of him, but only as a bystander. He was walking down a faraway street. He looked at me, but didn't come closer. I woke up without pain in my chest, because in the dream I didn't go after him. And that was all I needed to feel. That morning I had coffee with fresh bread and fruit, just like I used to. I opened the window, let the sun in, and went to care for my plants. I watered each one slowly, speaking to them like I used to. Life was finding its place again, with fewer illusions, more truth. Because when the lie dies, we're reborn. And that's exactly how I felt, a new kind of life. Simpler, more mine, stronger. I was still here. And that was miracle enough. About a month later, I was invited to do an interview for a local program about resilience. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to turn my pain into a show. But then I thought maybe by telling my story, I could help someone else stand up too. So I said yes. I prepared slowly. In the studio, the lights were harsh, the set cold, but I was calm. When the reporter asked how I managed to keep going, I said, "Because when a lie tries to bury you, the only answer is to bloom even stronger." The interview made waves. I received invitations to speak at events, support groups, even schools wanted me to talk to their students. And I went, afraid at first, but I went. I discovered that shared pain loses its poison, and that my voice, once silenced by shame, had become a bridge for other women. After one talk, an elderly woman hugged me and whispered, "You saved me from disappearing while alive." That broke me. Right then, I understood my mission was no longer about Franklin. It was about me and about us. I came home changed. Picked up the old journal I started after the grief and began writing again. But now it wasn't about loss. It was about courage. About dignity. About the possibility of starting over. I began writing letters to women I'd never met but who would feel every word. And I realized the justice had been served in court, yes. But the greatest justice was reclaiming my identity. I wasn't just the woman whose husband faked his death. I was Dolores, whole. In the process of rebuilding, I redid rooms in my house, changed the curtains, donated old clothes, planted new flowers on the porch, even rearranged the furniture. It was symbolic but powerful. Each change said, a new story lives here. And in that spirit, I painted a new canvas, an open field under a clear sky, with a woman walking alone toward the horizon. I hung it by the door. So anyone who stepped inside would know this house had been wounded, yes. But now it belonged to a woman standing tall. One day I ran into an old friend I hadn't seen since the funeral. She looked at me, surprised. Dolores, you look different. I laughed. Better or worse? I asked. She said, alive. That stayed with me for days, because that's exactly what it was. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. No more pretending. No more hiding. I didn't need sweet truths or merciful lies. I only needed my truth. Harsh, but mine. Franklin's sentence followed its course. The case moved forward. The media stopped talking, and his visits became rare. It was as if the world was slowly forgetting, and that brought me peace. I didn't want him remembered as a scandal or a monster. Just a consequence. A consequence of what happens when love walks without truth. And I was living proof that you can walk through fire and still bloom on the other side. Months later, I got an envelope from the prison. I recognized his handwriting from far away. Franklin. For a second, I wanted to rip it without opening. But something inside me said, read it. Close the door. I opened it. It was a letter on notebook paper, written in blue ink. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't beg. He just described his memories. Said the days were long, silent, and he spent them remembering our living room. The smell of the cake I used to bake, the way I laughed late at night watching movies. He admitted that for years, he pretended to be strong, but never felt whole after leaving home. Said he tried to forget me, but every time he saw a cloudy sky, he remembered me saying, looks like rain. Close the window. It was a melancholic letter, sad, but empty, because there was no responsibility. No truth, just memories as a way to justify himself. And I realized he hadn't changed. He was still the same man, unable to face what he had done. I folded the letter and put it away. No anger. I didn't need that anymore. Because now I saw it clearly, not everyone who hurts you is evil. But some will never have the courage to change. And the greatest act of love is to leave for good. That was the last thing I ever received from him. No more letters, no more news. And over time he became just that, the past. Without weight, without voice. Like an old page in a book you've already understood and no longer need to read. I kept going, with my talks, my painting, my quiet life. I made new friends and even got invited to display my artwork at a local cultural center. I used to laugh at the idea of me, Dolores, on a gallery wall. But inside I felt gratitude for everything, even the pain, because it took me where I never imagined going. I discovered a version of myself Franklin never knew. A woman thirsty for truth, with courage in her bones, and a story that didn't end with him. At one of those exhibits, a young woman asked, if you could go back in time, would you change anything? I thought about it, smiled, and said, no, because every lie he told pushed me closer to my own truth. She stayed quiet. So did I. Because that was the answer. I didn't want to go back. Didn't want to fix it. I only wanted to move forward. Because who I was now was stronger, fuller, and more real than anything I'd ever been before. And no one could take that from me. On the way home, the sky was clear, the wind soft. I walked slowly down the street, noticing windows, faces, the lights and homes. Everything felt different. Or maybe I was different. I came inside, shut the door gently, and smiled to myself. Because the woman he buried alive didn't just crawl out of the grave, she built a garden. And now that's where I lived, with peace, with color, and with the certainty that even after a symbolic death, I had come back more alive than ever. 1 year after it all, life had found a new rhythm. The pain no longer throbbed, it simply reminded me it had been there. Like a scar, visible, but healed. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat with my journal and decided to write a letter to myself. I started with Dear Dolores, you survived. And then I remembered, line by line, every moment I wanted to give up. Every step I took, even trembling. It was a silent testimony. Not for anyone else to read, but so I'd never forget who I'd become. I wrote about the woman who cried herself to sleep staring at the ceiling, who questioned her own sanity, who chased a ghost down dirt roads, who found the truth and stood tall. I wrote with clarity, without drama, with honesty, like someone who looks at the past and has no wish to go back. When I finished, I folded the paper and tucked it into the Bible beside my bed, the same one where months earlier I had begged for a sign. Now I was the miracle I had asked for. That same afternoon, I got a call from the TV producer who had interviewed me before. They wanted to turn my story into a dramatized special. I immediately said no. My life wasn't a soap opera. But that night, lying in bed, I thought again. What if telling my story helped more women see themselves? Take action? I called back and said yes with one condition. It had to be told truthfully. No gloss, no romance. Just what happened. Raw and real. Days later, I sat with a screenwriter. I told everything. No filters, no sugarcoating. She listened in silence, took notes, cried with me during certain parts. When I finished, she said, "This isn't a story about pain. It's a story about courage." And I smiled. Because deep down, that's what it was. The center wasn't him. It was me. The woman who faced the invisible, the impossible, and the unforgivable and still kept walking. Slowly, yes, but firmly. The special aired on a Saturday night. They used actresses, sets, sad music. I watched alone, tea in hand, blanket on my lap. When the scene came me in the bakery saying, "You killed me without a weapon," I cried as a viewer. As someone watching another woman go through it all. Because on screen, I was someone else, a character, and that freed me even more. I was real. And I was beyond that story. After it aired, I got over 3,000 messages. People saying they saw their mothers in my journey. Women sharing stories of abandonment, finally shedding shame. Young people saying they now understood their grandmothers. That's when I realized my story wasn't just mine. It belonged to many. To all. And for that, it was worth telling. Because every time we turn pain into a bridge, someone on the other side finds their way back to themselves. Over time, I was invited to write a book. At first, I hesitated. I didn't think I had what it took. But people said, "You already wrote when you survived." That stayed with me. I pulled out my old notebooks, notes, and letters. And I began, slowly, 1 page a day, writing with the calm of someone who's been through the storm. Each chapter was a stitched wound. And in the end, what emerged wasn't a tragedy. It was a story of rebirth. I titled the book Buried Alive, because that's what happened, but also because that's where I rose from. The cover showed a woman from behind, climbing a staircase of dirt, hands muddy, eyes closed, but her head held high. When I released the book, I didn't expect much. It was just a printed outpouring, but within a month, it had spread. Women began reading it in circles, discussing it in book clubs, quoting it online. And I was still surprised by it all. I started receiving travel invitations. I went to fairs, bookstores, churches, schools. Everywhere I heard the same story in different forms. Women who had been deceived, erased, used, left behind. And with each hug I received, something inside me healed too. Like by helping others rise, I was becoming lighter, more whole. Franklin, with all the destruction he caused, had unknowingly sparked something new. My voice. One night, at a talk in a rural town, a woman came up to me at the end. Her eyes were steady, her voice rough. She said, "I was you, but I didn't have the courage to report him. Today, seeing you, I understand it's never too late to start over." We hugged, and in that hug, I understood that justice is also this, inspiring, showing that there is life after being left behind, that no one deserves to live buried in invented grief. That truth, even hard, is more dignified than any lie-shaped comfort. I came back from that trip with my heart warm, walked in, dropped my bag, sat in my chair and closed my eyes. Life wasn't perfect. There were still bills, emptiness, longing. But now all of it lived alongside purpose, meaning, dignity. I wrote one final sentence in my journal before bed. What they tried to bury was a flower. And flowers, when stepped on, release fragrance. I turned off the light, slept like someone who fears no ghosts. because all of mine had already been defeated. The next morning, I opened the window and took a deep breath. The smell of coffee, the city waking up, the sunlight filtering through the curtains. Everything looked ordinary. But I knew I wasn't the same. I had faced the unthinkable. And now I walked firmly where there used to be only emptiness. Not by magic, but because I went to the bottom of the pain and came back. With clearer eyes, a louder voice, steadier steps, and the certainty that my story was only just beginning. Time went by, and like everything that matures in silence, my peace arrived without noise. One morning I woke up, walked to the mirror, and realized I didn't think of him anymore. Not with pain. Not with anger. Just as something that stayed in a time that no longer belonged to me. I got dressed slowly, had breakfast, and went out for a walk. On the way, I saw an elderly couple on a bench, holding hands. I smiled, not with envy, but with tenderness. That's when I understood true love still exists. What I had just wasn't with the right person. I walked to the cultural center where my paintings were on display. A group of high school students was visiting. As I passed, one of them recognized me and said, "You're Dolores from the book, right?" I nodded, smiling. She said, "Thank you for existing." I had no words. How could something as devastating as betrayal turn into something so pure? That confirmed it for me. Pain only wins when we stop. And I never stopped. Not again. At home at the end of that day, I picked up a fresh page and started a new journal. This time, not to record pain, but to celebrate victories. First I wrote, "Today, someone thanked me for existing." Then today, I smiled without thinking about the past. They weren't grand events. But for someone who had been buried alive, smiling in peace is a revolution. I decided I would write down one thing to be thankful for each month, so that if memory ever failed me, the paper would remind me of who I had become. That night I sat on the bed and opened the drawer where I had kept the old letters, the court documents, the photos. I looked at everything for a few minutes. Then I took a deep breath, closed the box, grabbed some tape and wrote on the lid, "Case closed." I placed it in the back of the closet, not to forget, but to put it where it belonged, the past. Because life, real life, the kind that pulses and embraces, only happens when we clear space in the soul for it to come back in. The following Sunday, I had lunch at my sister's house. A full table, laughter, the smell of good food. One of my nephews said, "Aunt Dolores, your eyes are shining." And I replied, "That's because now I see what matters." And it was true. Betrayal shook the ground under me, but it gave me wings. Lies tried to erase me, but lit up who I really was. And love, oh, I rediscovered it, not in others, but in myself. And that no one can take away. Not death, not pain, not even time. When I got home that day, I sat on the porch, closed my eyes and gave thanks. Not for what I had suffered, but for what I had overcome. Because sometimes life has to break us in order to rebuild us the right way. And I was rebuilt with strength, with faith, with dignity. What Franklin destroyed, I rebuilt. What they tried to bury bloomed. And now, looking up at that clear sky, only one thing came to mind. I won. And that's why every day I get up, take a deep breath, and tell myself, "You came back to life, Dolores, and no one's taking that from you." If this story touched you, consider subscribing here to the channel. Because sadly, many women still live stories of abandonment, betrayal, lies, and silence, but they don't have to live them alone. Share this story with someone who needs to know that there is a way out, that there is justice, and that real new beginnings are possible. If you've been through something similar, leave a comment down below. Tell me. Let's create a space for listening, strength, and truth. Your story might heal someone too. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What part of the story hit you the hardest? I want to know you, because every time someone listens with their heart, pain loses its grip and empathy grows. That's what this channel is about, to connect those who have felt the weight of betrayal but chose to stand anyway. Because together, we're stronger. Because truth, when shared, has the power to free not just one but many. So don't forget to leave a like. It helps more people find this story. And turn on the notifications, because every week there's a new story full of emotion, twists, and healing. Stories like this, told with courage, pain, but also truth, just like life really is. And sometimes even better than any movie. Because it was lived. Because it left marks. Because it taught us. To you who watched all the way through, thank you. From the bottom of my heart. You have no idea how much this means. Every view is a hug. Every comment is a voice saying, "You're not alone." And that changes everything. I know what it feels like to be alone. I know what it means to be doubted, but I also know what it means to survive, and more than that, to be reborn. That's why this channel exists, to give a voice to those who were silenced, to remind you that every pain has an end and every beginning starts with courage. If you know someone who's in a confusing relationship where the doubt is louder than the love, send them this video. Show them there's no shame in falling, only in choosing to live on the floor. Show them that every woman can, absolutely, start over. That every truth can, absolutely, grow. Even after the cruelest lie. Because once we choose to rise, not even the dirtiest past can stop us from shining again. And finally, take care of yourself. Like you would care for something precious, because that's what you are. Lies try to erase. Abandonment tries to shrink you. But none of that defines who you are. What defines you is what you do after everything falls apart. And if you've made it this far with me, I know one thing: you are strong. So tell me your story. I'm here to listen, to answer, to walk with you. Because even after the greatest lost, truth always rises again.